Hello everybody, welcome back to Wrigley's 4th Generation. I'm Alex Pat. Today is July 6th, 2016. We have just wrapped up a series against the Reds at Wrigley Field, but before we talk about anything right now, let's go back in time to June 19th. On June 19th, that was a Sunday, the Cubs defeated the Pittsburgh Pirates 10-5, completing a 3-game sweep at Wrigley Field. It was at that moment when everything could not get better, nothing could go wrong, things were great, everyone was happy and jolly, and it was just winning, and everything was wonderful. So we went into the series against the Cardinals at Wrigley Field, and we thought, alright, let's take care of these guys, let's get this lead up to 15, and let's go just partying until the end of the year. But then something strange happened. They lost a couple close games, got blown out in the last game for a sweep. Well, they were due to get swept, okay. And then against the Marlins, they lose 3 of 4. Well, this isn't looking good. This is starting to stink, really. And then in Cincinnati, 3 games, a 3-game sweep. No matter, everything's fine. And then the rapture, the end of all things. The sulfur and burning rocks fall from the sky, the volcanoes erupt, Judgment Day is upon us, the end of all things as we know it. A 4-game sweep to the hands of the Mets at Citi Field, including several blowout games, 10-2 and 14-3. And things are just on fire, nothing is going right, the world is cracking, people are falling into the core of the earth as it splits. And then, the Reds at Wrigley Field. Maybe that's our spaceship away from Earth to find life somewhere else. They win the first game 10-4. Okay, that's looking good. But then they drop 9-5 and then lose the series today by a final score of 5-3. Here we go. The Earth has split in half. The airplane has crashed into the mountain. The fire is raining down even harder. Tornadoes are everywhere. Everything is mass hysteria. Dogs and cats living together. It's the end of time as we know it. It's all over. Okay, all right. All right. Let's take a step back for a minute from the end of the world analogies, and let's put a few things into perspective and maybe look at some goods and bads. Today was a game they were winning 3-1 in the 7th inning, and then Tucker Barnhart hits a 3-run homer to give the Reds the lead and was ultimately enough to win the game. It's a very bad stretch right now these past 2.5 weeks. But there's still 20 games over 500, and they're still in first by 8.5 right now. And we could also thank the Pirates last night for their comeback win against the Cardinals. It's kind of amazing that this team has gone through such a bad stretch and they still have a pretty solid lead in the division. That doesn't mean we can't make this a habit, but it's got to be at least somewhat reassuring that we could still have a decent lead at this point after all this. Now, that could change. They could keep losing. The Cardinals could pick up some more games. The Pirates are hot all of a sudden. We got a big series coming up against the Pirates going into the All-Star break. If we could at least win that series, things will be a bit better. But, right now, it just seems like nothing is going right. And everything seems to be going the wrong way in every aspect. The starting pitching hasn't been as good. The bullpen has not been very good. And another interesting stat I want to talk about, brought up by Jesse Rogers, and a lot of people take different stock in this stat, so take it as you will. The stat says that going into the late innings, after trailing after 7 innings, the Cubs are 2-27. Trailing going into the 8th inning, they are 1-29. Now, I know the old saying, as long as you get into the playoffs, anything can happen, which is very true. We see it year after year. And some would argue maybe it's good that they're not the best team right now because you have that whole, you're the best team, you have the pressure and all that stuff. But again, take that as you will. Does it concern you that this team cannot come back in the late innings? I mean, one of the most frustrating losses was the first game against the Mets where we had the 3-0 lead, We gave them the 4-3 lead, and then we had 2 in scoring position with nobody out in the middle of the order, and we couldn't get 1 run. I mean, that was terrible. That was pathetic. But will it really matter come postseason? Again, take that as you will. I don't really want to get into a debate about that. I think debates about that stat are both valid on each aspect. I mean, on one hand, what you do in October in the regular season is very different many of the times, but also it is concerning that, you can't come through in late innings in October. If you're down late, you're going to need to come back and you're going to need to hold leads. So whether you talk about the bullpen or their ability to come back from deficits late in games, there's a lot you could look at. I think there is no doubt, though, absolutely no doubt whatsoever, this bullpen needs work. This is not an October bullpen right here. There needs to be some changes. And are those changes going to be Chapman and Miller? No, they're not. I really don't see it. I mean, the Yankees don't want to get rid of Miller, and the Chapman price is going to be way too high. Even if you were to trade for Miller, they would want like Kyle Schwarber or something, and Theo and Jett are not going to do that. But you got to do something. You got to do something, and I'm sorry, 40-year-old rejects are not going to cut it. Now, we were lucky to milk out Clayton Richard last year. They milked all usefulness out of him. I think he's gone. Peralta's already been DFA'd. Now, Justin Grimm has been better. It's been a struggle lately, but he's been better lately. Now, Trevor Cahill and Pedro Strop are the most controversial ones because a lot of the season they've done a lot of good things, but when they make a mistake every now and then, it could be a very big and costly mistake, and that catches a lot of attention from people. There's no doubt Hector Rondon has been so good, so Cahill I say is a keep, Strop is a keep, Rondon is a keep, you still keep Grimm, and Travis Wood has come up very big in many situations. He'll have a rough outing here or there, but, a lot of people say they have a love-hate relationship with him. I mean, at the beginning of the year, that did make sense. I kind of said the same thing, but lately overall, he's come up very big in the pen. But there's got to be more done. And we'll see what Theo does. He's obviously going to do something. There's no question. It's just a matter of what. Okay, so we looked at the slump. There's been the lack of big hitting or clutch hitting, if you want to call that, in the late innings. I know the stat clutch doesn't really exist, but the concept kind of does. You got to come up with the big hits with the men in scoring position at the right times. I mean, the biggest example, like I said, was in the Mets series in Game 1. I mean, that right there kind of summed up a lot of this. One thing I say a lot, and I feel like the Cubs do this maybe more than they should, you gotta rely more than swinging for the fences to generate runs, because I feel like when they're scoring runs, it's all because of the long ball. They're not putting together that long string of hits. They're still taking some very good at-bats, but I just feel like they were a lot better at that in the beginning of the year. It seemed like every single at-bat was just a grind, and you don't see that as much. And obviously pitchers are going to adjust. It's not going to stay at that same rate as it was, but I want the Cubs to get back in that mentality. Less swinging for the fences all the time, and just more generating runs, and not by bunting. For goodness sake, stop with the bunting! Sorry, I had to say it. And of course, the other big thing we got to talk about is when it comes to starting pitching, we've seen the struggles of Jake Arrieta, and that's something you hate to see. Now, is it so much what he's throwing? It's really the command. It's what it comes down to. It's the command. His fastball doesn't have the command it once did. The slider is not being swung at. It doesn't have as sharp of a bite. He'll tell you that. Fans will tell you that. The coaching would probably tell you that. I mean, he hasn't been like gut-wrenchingly awful. It's just not himself. It's a lot of the walks that are killing him. He had a rough game in Cincinnati. He had a pretty rough game in New York, but he gave up about 4 runs, and he went, I think, like around 5. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but it could have been worse for him in that game. But overall, you don't like seeing Jake Arrieta struggle with his command, because that's what the problem was with him in Baltimore. He had command issues. That's why he didn't perform that well in Baltimore. And lately, I'm sorry, John Lackey's been terrible. And John Lackey is someone I'm not afraid to criticize just because of the kind of person he is. I'm not saying I hate the guy. I like him when he does well, but, John Lackey still sometimes rubs me the wrong way. I'll be completely honest. And when he struggles like that and he starts getting mad at himself and all that, it's just, I hate watching that. I really do. It irritates me. It irritates the teammates, I'm pretty sure, because let's face it, John Lackey's not exactly a sparkling great teammate, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, there's a lot that can be said, and sometimes you don't know what to say when they're struggling. Seems like every day something goofy happens, and there's some sort of, quote, bad luck, which it's not always bad luck. And this has nothing to do with how they're performing, but even the umpiring, some of those strike three calls going to the Mets series and today, again, they would have lost either way, I'm pretty sure, in those games, but it's been pretty brutal. It's been pretty brutal all around in baseball, particularly this year. I don't know if it's just me, but it's been really bad. But that's a whole other conversation for another time. So let's wrap it all up here. This losing streak over the 2.5 weeks, this sucks. They've only won a few games out of a lot more. They've won one game this week so far. I know it's only Wednesday, but going back to last week, their last win was against the Reds 1 week ago today. 1 week ago today, they swept the Reds in Cincinnati. And then since then, they've only won one game. And before that sweep of the Reds, they won only one game since the 19th. And that was that sweep against the Pirates. And it was the first time the Reds beat us in a series this year, because the Reds have been dominated by the Cubs all year. And this is the first time they've won 2 in a row against the Cubs in a series win. So, even they can beat us right now. Does this mean it's going to keep up this way? Theo Epstein's not going to let that happen. Joe Mann's not going to let that happen. And the players are not going to let that happen. They got off to such an unreal start this season that there was an inevitable evening out. And by that I mean they weren't going to play over 700 ball all year, because that's impossible. There was going to be an evening out point of the season. And I even said there's going to be a really bad streak this year. A really bad. And it's going to be awful like you haven't seen in a Cubs contending team. And it's happening. What I'm worried about is how much longer is it going to go? We really all want this to end. And what stinks is that the Cubs don't have an off day until the All-Star break. And I think the All-Star break could be the biggest blessing this team has seen. That and getting back Soler and Dexter Fowler. This also shows how valuable Dexter Fowler really is to this team, because his splits with and without him are very different. When they have him, they're like beyond the best team in baseball. So, just try to stay calm. I've been getting very frustrated watching the games lately. I'm not going to lie. I've said some things that I know are, not right about this team, and I know you got to put it in perspective and realism. They were not going to play lights out all year, but there are some things that they need to change, and there's a whole other half to go, and this team's not just going to sit around and not make changes, because they will, and some of these changes will take a little time, whether it's approach or getting a deal done. It doesn't just happen, like that. So, the world ending, no. Keep your head up. I know it's hard. It's hard for me. You just got to think of it in a good perspective. So let's hope for the best. Let's get to the All-Star break. If you haven't read my All-Star article yet, I just posted that this morning. It's about the Cubs All-Star selections, how they'll make up the starting infield, and I talk a little bit about their WAR value. So if you like a nice wins above replacement article, check it out. So, without further ado, I bid you adieu. And have a good day. Try not to let this ruin your entire day. I know sometimes the diehard fans like myself, a loss like that just really irks me the rest of the day. And it's actually funny. I'm looking out my window right now, and I see a red cardinal sitting on the wire. And I think the cardinal is a beautiful bird, but from a Cubs fan perspective, you just shake your fist at your rival. And hopefully the Pirates can beat him again so they can maintain their lead. If they don't, it'll be down to 7.5 games, which still isn't horrible. But again, a division lead can disappear fairly fast. So, keep your head up. I'm Alex Pat. Have a great day.